Hello and welcome back to the County Chat channel. Today we've got a bit of an Ashes special. I use often a special, but this one I feel like is a special. The County Chat on international cricket. Who thought it would happen? Here we are. And I've got a very, very special guest, one of my favourite content creators in the kind of English cricket scene. It's Liam Before Wicket. So Liam, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me and appreciate the kind words on my content. I love that.
No worries, mate. No worries. It's as I said just before we started recording, no one seems to rile up Aussies quite like you, which is really perfect for what we're going on to talk about. So, well, yeah, I mean, we're just going to cover all things Ashes, really. Go into squads, into pitch conditions, into how terrified I am of Scott Boland. All of the things that all English cricket fans, I'm sure, resonate with. But to start off, I'm wearing the England cricket hat, putting my England cricket hat on, if you will. Just general thoughts on the squad. I guess it's not, it's a very, very expected squad, I guess. So I guess it's not massively surprising, but people maybe like Will Jacks, I guess, is an interesting one. So yeah, what were your initial thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I mean, I wasn't hugely surprised. We knew Bashir was going to go. Whether people agree with that or not, he was always going to go. The two surprises, I guess, yeah, Will Jacks and to an extent Matt Potts being back in the side as well. You know, I'm glad he is because I feel like, you know, his omission from the squad was a little bit strange. I didn't really get why he was suddenly bombed out. Didn't feel like he did a lot wrong. And I'm a big fan of Matt Potts. How much he'll actually play over there, I don't actually think he'll play much, but pleased to see him back in. But yeah, the Will Jacks one was the big one. Didn't see that coming. I don't think anyone saw that coming, but it was one of those where sort of, you know, made me step back a little bit. And then I kind of went, I don't think I mind it, but I can't really articulate properly why I don't mind it. I just quite like having his name in that squad. It's a weird one.
Well, I think it's an interesting one. He kind of like combines the two Baz Bowl like amazing things, as in like he top spins the ball and he hits the ball hard when he bats. So it's like that kind of double side of it. Kind of he's so Baz Bowl in a way. Despite having a first-class bowling average of sort of north of 50 and all of the things that, again, you can get lost in trying to reason with Bazball in a weird way. But I think it's quite an interesting one where he was kind of an outside suggestion, but then as soon as he's in that squad, you kind of don't see it as a weird one. I think you're right as well saying about Matthew Potts. I think I was surprised when he first got dropped, but then I was even more surprised when he then got re-put in, if that makes sense. But I think they seem to put a big emphasis on attitude and feelings and opinions, and I think that's an interesting one in and of itself. But he clearly is a player, he's a player who is quite like, you know, all in. You know, if you're watching bowl for Durham, he'll bowl, you know, literally 10 plus over spells and look as fresh at the start and at the end of it. Of course, he plays with Stokes up at Durham, so I guess he knows about him better than anyone probably. But it's just a bit of an interesting one. But yeah, I guess... Yeah, I kind of agree with you that I don't really see how much he'll play in a way. I don't see, excuse me, sorry. And it's a bit of an interesting one to see if he's just there effectively as a good backup. Like they know they can get 20 overs out of him every day if they need to effectively.
Yeah, I think they kind of needed to take someone who, I'm not comparing Matt Potts to Chris Wokes, but someone who has that kind of ability to do the dog's body overs if needed.
Yeah.
Whether, like you say, whether he'll play, I don't know. I'd like to hope we see him once. Another thing to consider with Matt Potts as well, he has a very good record against Steve Smith, which not many people can say in international cricket or any cricket. You know, that's not me coming out on a whim and saying he's going to get Steve Smith out every test match, because the Aussies will love me saying that. But he's the sort of guy that has done it before. I think he did it twice in the 100 this year. I don't have all the stats to hand, but he's got him a few times. And it's like, you know, I'm just thinking if Steve Smith has one of those series, which, let's be fair, Steve Smith will have, is it kind of thing, you know, do we throw him in because he's just got a bit of that mental side of it? We all know cricket's as much as a mental game as is a skill game.
Yeah.
So a guy that's got him before, I don't know, it could have been part of their thinking. But yeah, it's nice because I feel like we're going into it with decent depth, which I feel like we probably haven't had in recent Ashes tours. Like, you know, you've always sort of worried about bowlers getting injured, who comes in. And there's still a massive risk of our bowling lineup being impacted by injuries. But I feel like Potts coming in or Cars coming in, whichever way around they go with it, makes me feel a lot better than it has in previous years.
No, I think that's a really, really fair point, is that depth. Even if you don't think they're like the top end of the spectrum, like, you know, your Wood and your Archer, those two being there feels like a somewhat of a safety blanket, a bit more than in previous tours where it kind of felt like, where are we getting 20 wickets from to win the test match? It's like terrifying sort of thing. I guess another interesting one, and I guess, you know, I see you with your Warwickshire Birmingham Bears jumper on. with my Sussex hat on, not that it's on, but it's Ollie Robinson. He kind of was the standout player when we went to Australia last, and again in a tour where it's not difficult to be one of the standout players when you lose 4-0. But he's obviously I've spoke about it quite at length, but a test bowler of in about 20 matches getting about 90 wickets at an average of 22. You don't really see that very often, and doing well in Australia. Obviously, he got loosely compared with one of the greatest bowlers ever in Glenn McGrath, being sort of tall but not fast, but being very consistent. I guess I'm trying to get away from my bias around him as a Sussex player, but I can't see why he didn't even make it into the England Lions squad, which we'll get onto in a minute. So I guess just your thoughts on that, I guess.
I think Ollie Robinson is a really strange case, and it's a difficult one to really properly sum up, because I'm very much in a camp of he is, I think, one of England's most skillful bowlers that we have available. He's never really let England down on the field of play. I know we could talk about the fitness side of his games. I get that. But I think, obviously, I just think he's done for England now. I don't think he'll ever play for England again. I think this is largely because of an attitude thing.
Yeah, definitely.
I know there's been sort of controversies with ECB and things he's posted on social media, and I haven't really delved into all of that. But they obviously, he just doesn't, his face doesn't fit anymore. And I think, it's a really difficult one, because I think he would bring a lot to, especially how the wickets play in Australia now compared to how they have in the past. This would suit him more, and I feel like he would be a great bowler to have in that attack. But I just think they've just moved on from him, and people will say that's unfair. It's weird, 'cause I love him as a cricketer in that I think he's a brilliant bowler. I don't like him as a guy because some of the things he's done in the past and all that. I don't think many people do. But I always think a telling point of who's a good player is how they're perceived around the world. And I find it, I don't know if you ever see this much, but I love going on Twitter or going on any form of social media and just seeing what Indian fans are commenting or what Aussie fans are commenting. And the name that always comes up when it comes around to squad selections is, why haven't you picked Joss Buttler? Well, that's because they just love franchise cricket. We all know why we're not picking Joss Buttler. But the other one is Ollie Robinson. And, international fans can't comprehend why we don't pick him anymore. I almost feel sorry for him, but at the same time, I don't.
I think it's a very fair thing to say, because I think as any sports fan, I'm going to make that clear, is that a lot of the stuff he's done off the field, I'm not going to pretend I condone it or whatever, or I find it like a enchanting or you warm to him in that way. But then there's that weird aspect of like, well, you don't win, as maybe an Australian fan would say, you don't win test matches by being the nicest team or being the best blokes or whatever. And it's a tricky one where you have that kind of back and forth with yourself internally.
And that maybe is the difference right there between England and Australia. And this comes into the whole moral victory stuff, right? If Ollie Robinson was Australian, firstly, he wouldn't get into their bowling attack to start with. But if he was good enough to, they would pick him. They wouldn't care about anything he's tweeted. They wouldn't care about what he's done off the field. They would pick him. And that's because Aussies do, as much as I like to sort of, take the mick out of Aussies, they do have this innate sort of ability they're winners. They are winners. They're a nation that are winners. In England are not winners, but England do still think so much more about image and all of these other sort of factors. That's an old-fashioned nature of cricket and the sort of the traditions of cricket. So the Aussies would pick him. If he was an Aussie, he'd be in that squad 100%, and he'd probably take a fiver in that first day.
No, I think you really hit a nail on the head. And again, I feel at the fear of we can get lost in lots of things throughout this podcast, but you really hit the nail on the head to me of that kind of like the real cutthroat, just like we pick who's best, we pick who's going to win test matches. We don't care about, and again, that comes into, you want to talk about that, I've had debates with my family about the Carey dismissal till the cows come home and how fair or not that was. Because to me, I kind of see it from an Australian perspective, actually, in that case of being like, well, it was in the rules, they did it. Like, should they apologise for following the rules? But then in the same way, that's where it came down to at Lords, the home of cricket, the home of proper values, and all of that stuff is why it really riled people up. And I guess, as you kind of talking about, it's like we feel like it's almost something more. There's something more to being an England cricketer and a Test cricketer, that you have to sort of pick yourself up to such a regard. But it's certainly an interesting one, because, as you say, I watch him a lot bowling for Sussex, and it does feel like when he's on song, you can't get much better around, like, for being a seam bowler, like what he does. He's not a swing bowler, but much, really. He doesn't swing it much, but he will hit a ball on the sixpence and kind of consistently hit the top of off stump. And again, when you're talking about production with the Kookaburra ball, whether it be in county cricket or whether it be in Australia, it's being consistent is almost always one of the big things. So yeah, it'll be an interesting one, especially if injuries sort of come about in the bowling lineup, with obviously Archer and Wood being the two prime candidates. Like, would they keep some of the guys from the England line squad around just in case, or what's the contingency plan? I have no idea, because presumably you don't want people flying over from England to like fill in those gaps or whatever it might be. So it's a whole interesting thing. I guess kind of staying on the squad, but the kind of one of the hot topics, I guess, is what are your thoughts on the kind of removal of Pope as vice captain? Does that to you say Bethell will be in at 3, or is that as simple as they think without Stokes, if he gets injured, which again, speaking of Wood and Archer, is possible, that they just prefer Brook as a captain? Where do you fall on that?
It's a really tough one, and I've heard all the other opinions, and I feel like this is what everyone's been talking about for the last couple of months. Which there's not a simple answer, and I think part of it is England so heavily can see the future in Harry Brook, and so want to. And why wouldn't you? Because he's brilliant. I mean, look at him. I mean, just this week, at the time recording, he's just gone mental in New Zealand again. And it's like, we all know he is a star already, and he's only going to get better. I think he'll be, within the sort of the Fab Four in a few years' time.
Absolutely.
100%. So I think there's part of England just see that, and he's probably the next Test captain. I think we would all expect him to be next captain, not Ollie Pope. So there's an element of that as well. But I also do think they've done it not to drop Ollie Pope, because I think Ollie Pope plays the first Test, but I think it gives them. I feel like they've got a doubt in their mind as to how he's going to go in Australia, and it gives them the opportunity to drop him a lot easier for Jacob Bethell if 2 Tests in, it's all gone horribly wrong. I think that's why they've done it. It feels like it's just it's a much bigger thing to drop your vice captain than it is just dropping your number 3 batsman.
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, I hit the nail on the head. I think it's that contingency plan aspect. That's what it seems like to me. It's almost like it's like kind of making sure you don't have to make a really massive spill. And again, when you're in Australia, the smallest things get built up massively, let alone dropping your vice captain, which is objectively a big deal. So I think you hit the nail on the head there, because I think to me that's the exact way I've looked at it, is that they clearly see Bethell as this superstar. And I was chatting to my friend Michael Booth, who's been one of his best close mates at Warwickshire, and just the way pro cricketers seem to talk about him, it is genuinely a bit like they're almost starstruck. And I'm not saying that Boothie, if you listen to this, I don't think you're starstruck of your mate Bethell, but they're talking about this, just how he plays pace bowling, especially. And yeah,
I think even just to see that there was that clip going around of Joe Root talking about when he saw him, when I think he was like Bethell's 10 years old, and for someone like Joe Root, who is one of the game's greatest, for him to notice it at that age is phenomenal. Yeah, he is going to be a star. I still don't think he's a number 3. I don't think he will be a number 3. I still think he's a middle order batsman, really, and that's partly from what I've seen watching him at Warwickshire, which is limited. He hasn't played that much cricket for Warwickshire, but I think he's got the mental characteristics of a number 3, in that he's super chilled, he's super calm, almost the opposite to Ollie Pope, because Ollie Pope is always very erratic and makes me nervous watching it, which I don't really need in Australia when I'm going to be nervous enough as it is. But Jacob Bethell brings a calmness, a coolness, but I just think his natural game suits like a number 5 more. I can see Root retiring, Brook goes to 4, Bethell goes 5, and then who fills 3? I don't know. I hope someone else comes through.
Yeah, I guess the issue is that England is almost feels like we're full of load of really, really good middle order players. Like, you even talk about, I was thinking about the other day seeing Sam Curran playing the ODIs, and it's like, if you told 2018 England fans that Sam Curran would be nowhere near the Test team by this time, you'd be like, what? Like, he was like their star in those India series and all of that back then. So it's quite interesting. But again, you don't see him slotting in at 3. I mean, maybe in a Bazball world he would, but you know what I mean? Players like mercurially talented as him, you can't see them slotting in any higher than 5. But then someone like Brook, you really don't see it's you could keep going and going and going. But it's an interesting one, for sure. And sort of moving on with squads, but sort of similarly, not adjacent squads, I guess you'd say, it is the kind of build up. I mean, I was saying before we got on to recording about how the older heads of certain, I saw the Jeffrey Boycott episode, and he was talking about how he can't believe how little prep they do, but even Alistair Cook, who's obviously still of that kind of maybe old school mindset, whereas the ECB now are like, oh well, they're playing a white ball series in New Zealand, so what's the big deal? And they're playing, to those who don't know, is that they're playing one match in a warm up against an England Lions squad, but the England Lions squad is almost players who are under the age of 25, or definitely in their younger stages of their career. I personally have a view of it that I think you should have had some more seasoned pros who could make just a harder test and make it a bit more of a really evenly contested match. But to be fair, we don't really know how they're going to go about that match. So I guess what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on the selection of that England Lions squad?
Yeah, agree in terms of the warm-up. I mean, I think I'm looking at that warm-up game with the Lions thinking, oh, it'd be interesting to see how Tom Hartley does or how Tom Haynes does or whatever, where I think you should be looking at it going, I'm interested to see how England do against those bowlers from the Lions. And I feel like if it was how the Lions used to be selected, which was just the best county players at the time, hasn't been like that for a while, it would make for a much more interesting game. Like I think there should be people, even though they've been tried and tested, Dom Sibley should be in there. Hasiba Mead, these people have scored bags of runs this year, are in form. Let them go and bat against our bowling attack, But I don't really know what the England Lions is anymore. I don't really know what it's supposed to be. It feels like it's more like an academy now instead of our second team. If that's what it is, that's fine. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with having like an England academy or Cubs or whatever we want to call it. But I feel like there needs to be something else. So I don't think it's a great warm-up schedule, but I know there's a lot of this chat now of it doesn't really play that much of a role. They're all playing so much white ball cricket. They've got the New Zealand series at the moment. They will go into that fresh. I just worry a bit more about the conditions side of it and how much time in the middle they've actually had in Australia. That's what worries me. In terms of the squad, I wasn't too surprised because, like I said, this is what the Lions is now. There's a few sort of the main omission was a safe save. I think after the season he's had, I get it to an extent with people like Hamid and Sibley because they've had their go for England before, and maybe in the same way of Ollie Robinson, the ECB might have gone, we're moving on from them. But I think for Sabe in the season he's had, I don't know what more he can do to get in that Lions squad. It's just, if I was him, I'd be like, I'm just going to go play franchise cricket. I'll make more money if I'm not going to get in this England setup. So yeah, but I'm not hugely surprised. That was the only one that really sort of stood out to me, but I feel sorry for him.
No, I think, yeah, I totally agree. I did a bit of a breakdown on some of my sort of breakout players, and Saif Zaid was probably the most obvious. Like, he went into the season averaging about 25. He came out of the season averaging 35, and he'd played about 6 full seasons. So what does that tell you? He scored a lot of runs. He scored, it was like just shy of 1,500, wasn't it? An average about just shy of 70. And yeah, it is the question of like, what more can you do? And it's one of those where, because he was batting so well, I didn't even realise he'd taken like 30 wickets, averaging like 25 with the ball. It's one of those where, as you say, it's a whole nother discussion, as I keep sort of referring to, but it's kind of like, well, where do these players go? As you rightly put, is like, if that's not where they're going, like if you do that and don't get into an England Lions squad, let alone an England squad, why wouldn't you say, I'm 27, let's say I've got 5 more years of elite cricket, why would I not just go franchise cricket, and just say, sod it with Red Bull? There's no progression. So it's a difficult one. I think you're totally right. I think it was interesting with I think there were some bowlers who I thought were bowling so well that it gives you that kind of like, I thought a Tom Taylor for Worcestershire. I mean, again, he was obviously bowling at New Road half the year, which was underwater, and it was a lot of wickets to be taken. But he was also bowling with an incredible amount of confidence and had the ball on a string. He's like, I'd be interested, and even if it is Crawley and Duckett smack him around and it just builds their confidence, I don't mind that in a way. But it's also like, it's giving these players who are basically, there's no room for a Scott Boland anymore. England wouldn't ever pick a Scott Boland. He had his Test debut at 32, I think. It's like this Lions squad, which is a second team, as you say, a Cubs, what it seems like more nowadays, where it's just a young players who more probably will play for England. Is it, do you not want the ability for like late developers to show they can be late developers and play international cricket? I guess that's what I worry you miss out on.
Yeah, completely. And I think, like, the Cubs idea, and I want to sort of trademark that. If the ECB run with that, that's my idea. But I think having like a Cubs or a sort of this youthful side is brilliant, because I feel like actually what cricket maybe hasn't done enough in the past is actually invest in young players, and sort of the ECB are definitely doing that. Shoaib Bashir is a prime example. Like, a lot of us at the moment are going, is he really good enough to be our frontline spinner in Australia? I know we'll come on to this later on, but they're not looking at that necessarily. They're also thinking in 10 years' time he could be a really good spinner. Kind of don't mind it, but at the same time it's got to be a sort of more of a method and a strategy to it, so we don't go underprepared into series. But if the Lions are going to be like that, then we just need something else. We need some other reward for county cricket, because I say this as just a fan of county cricket. I've loved watching it this year. I always love watching it, and I actually think that the quality of cricket has been really high this year. But for me, it's lost the reward factor of county cricket. Aside from, it's great to see Notts win the league, that's great. But like, aside from that element, like there's no individual reward. And I used to enjoy watching county cricket and going, oh, that guy's had a great season. He's surely going to be in England squad next year. I'm looking forward to see how he does in South Africa in the winter. And
Yeah,
it just, you look at some of the players now and you just know, you look at them and go, they won't play for England because they're not fast enough. They're not fit enough. They're not tall and bouncy enough. Like, you don't know, like all of these things that we now see handpicked from certain players, like spinners. I look at spinners now and I go, well, if they haven't got high release point, they're not going to get picked. That's
yeah,
sort of how I look at it now. And there's some great spinners in county cricket that aren't getting the
absolutely.
recognition because of this new way of selecting. So yeah, it's definitely a frustration of mine. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's only one county cricket fan saying that, but I'm sure I'm not alone in that sort of frustration.
No, I think you really hit the nail on the head of what has maybe, especially this year, whilst I've kind of taken it a bit more like looking at it a bit almost like more academically or more analytically, is kind of that, yeah, that kind of the motivation point of it. You know, is if your idea of county cricket is obviously to produce the best players to play for England, which is what they were trying to do with the Kookaburra ball and is what they're trying to do just in general, is therefore, if you're trying to do that, then how are you going to get these players thinking, yeah, there's a possibility and an avenue? And I totally get what you mean about, you know, blooding young players early. It's never a bad thing. It should be seen as a positive. But then there's also the element of the sports psychology aspect of like, well, if you have 5 years in your early 20s when you're not ready to be a test cricketer and go at an average of 50 and an economy of 4, by the time you're primed, is it almost not jade you from Test cricket in a way? Whereas someone like, again, I use Scott Boland just because we're talking about Australia and all of that, you kind of have that him in mind. But it's like he just was dominating Sheffield Shield cricket for a very long period of time, but probably got to a point where he was like, Test cricket's not happening, it's gone past me, and that's okay because he was behind the likes of Hazelwood, Stark, and Cummins. But then all of a sudden, some injuries happen and what have you. He comes in and he's not got any baggage. He's just like, I know how good I am. I know the skills I have, and I think that's something I've always been very, you know, I've really always enjoyed about Australian cricket selection. And as you say, they're winners and they think about winning right now. They think, how are we going to win this Test series in this moment? And I think there's England, in my opinion, have gone a little bit too far the other way. And I don't mind, as you say, I think as England fans, you can understand it and you can kind of appreciate, you know, as the same as like your football team you support when, you know, the young academy player comes on, you don't really criticise them because you want them to do well and you see them playing well in the future. But when you're the England national team, you should be trying to pick the 11 best players to win a Test series right now. And if you ask me honestly, and I think if you asked most avid county cricket fans or avid even England cricket fans, would you say Shoaib Bashir's our best chance at doing that? I don't know if they would say that, or you know, and you could apply that to a few different people. But I think Shoaib Bashir is that kind of almost lightning rod for what is a kind of more broad experience of a county cricket fan.
Mm. And I think what you also do with young players like that, because the justification for people like, not just Bashir, I'm including like Zach Crawley as well, what we've heard about both of those guys to justify their selection is, oh, they'll really suit Australia. Bashir's high release point, Crawley's kind of, you know, how he likes to play off the back foot, you know, be on top of the bounce. All correct. Like, I don't disagree with that. But the problem is then you've got two still relatively young guys who are going into a massive series with so much pressure anyway, with added pressure by the guy selecting the team going, no, these guys would be great in Australia because of this. And it's like, again, do you want that on a young player? It's difficult. And it's very different to football. And I mean, I'm a big football fan as well. And it's like, you know, when I see a young player come through, I mean, I'm a Birmingham fan. I was there when Jude Bellingham came on and made his debut. And it's like, we were like, this guy's going to be a star. And we knew he was, in the same way a lot of people are saying that about Jacob Bethell.
Yeah.
But cricket is so different.
Yeah.
Because it's such a mental side of the game as well. It's,
absolutely,
you know, I'm not saying football isn't, and you have to be mentally strong in football. Of course you do. But to walk out at the Gabba, you know, with all of those Aussies shouting at you, pressure on, that is mental strength, and that is very hard for anyone to do. Let alone a young cricketer. So yeah, I feel like the ECB are inadvertently putting a lot of pressure on these young players, but could pay off. Who knows?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I guess it also goes into England almost do talk about. It does seem like our Test cycles come in purely Ashes down under. It's like, you know, when we lost really badly in 21-22, we did the high performance review with Andrew Strauss, and that was where the Kookaburra ball came in and all of the things that have come in the last 4 years. But then, as you say, they may not even realise it, but there is a kind of added pressure is almost putting that as the pinnacle. Whereas I think as much as, again, we're comparing England to Australia mindsets kind of throughout this, because I guess it is the nature of this, but I think Australia, as much as, of course, they want to absolutely smash us, you know, there's the old enemy, all the things that, you know, but I think they also probably view a test series with India as like equally, if not more, of a who's the best team in the world sort of thing, because I think we can all agree England haven't been that in the sort of maybe, well, quite basically since we last won in Australia, which I guess is maybe arguing against myself there. But it's an interesting point in that you kind of like, if you keep putting, as you say, kind of extra pressure each time you go, and we all agree that the psychological aspects of the Ashes Down Under is the biggest thing, then it's like, well, surely, but I guess that's within the setup. They kind of they say about taking the pressure off and just performing your best. But it's an interesting one. But I think you make a really good point. Is it's like, if they do really, both of these, Bashir and Crawley, do really badly down under this series, having done, let's be honest, for a test level and what you'd expect for test level players in the last 3 or 4 years, not done that great, is that then they'll just drop them like that? Is that, would they have nothing else to say? Or do they double down again? Do they say, well, we Crawley might have averaged 15 and Bashir might have gone at 6s, but, we still see the talent there, we still see the et cetera, rather than just letting them go back into county cricket for 2-3 years. And if they keep proving themselves there again, which, again, they haven't done yet, and I guess that's why county cricket fans get a bit frustrated, it's an interesting one. I guess I'm slightly waffling, but you get what I'm...
No, I get your point, and it's really interesting what you say about Australian fans and all the Cricket Australia, and whether they're thinking in Ashes or they're thinking in series. And I think you're probably right. They're thinking about the next series as soon as the Ashes is over, where we're very much thinking, okay, well, how do we now build a squad for the next Ashes? Which isn't necessarily wrong, but what that does give you is, we all know, like, English cricket fans, we love to criticise. I do it a lot on my channel. It's, that's what we do best. And when you sort of build these players up, like Crawley and Bashir, it then gives all the fans the pile-on happens because we built it up to this point. So, if Bashir and Crawley don't go well in Australia, everyone will be saying, that's them done, bid them off now, move on. I don't think they will do that with Bashir. I don't really think they should do that with Bashir, and I'm not Bashir's biggest fan, but I feel like even if he doesn't have a great Ashes, I feel like he should probably still get the next series. He should probably still get another year in that side if they are going to invest in him. Crawley, I think, is a different matter. I think there's the difference with Bashir. There's not obvious people banging on the door to come in and be our next spinner yet. There's options who are probably better than Bashir, but there's no one we're going, how is this guy not in the team? With Crawley, I think you've got an abundance now of good top order batsmen that can come in and open that batting, whether you're going back to a Sibley or a Hamid, or you're looking at Haynes, or you're looking at even someone like Ben McKinney. There are options out there, and I think Crawley can only keep going with the odd incredible 200 every now and again, for a certain amount of time.
No, I think you're dead on. I think that there is a difference there. But I guess, again, you go back to the sort of demotivating part. And it's like, a lad I went to school with and was my captain, Jack Carson. He's like an excellent tall off spinner who has a high release point. If you looked at him and Bashir's records, you wouldn't believe that Bashir's the one who's had a test call up and played 30 tests. But then again, as you say, he would probably even say this of himself, that he's not like smashing down the door. And also Bashir's played, probably 20 tests now? I'm sort of pulling this up the top of my head. But whereas Crawley's, now 50 plus tests in, and he's still not doing consistently well. But then that was the thing they said when they first came in with bad ball and stuck with Crawley, was that we're not looking for him to be a consistent run scorer. We're looking for the occasional innings. And I don't know if they use that phrase because that's a bit harsh, but the occasional special innings. And as you say, because again, when Crawley's at full flow, it is,
No, he's brilliant.
It's brilliant.
And he's so good to watch.
It's hard to argue, isn't it?
I think what's probably changed since he's first come into the side is that sort of line of, we're looking at this game changing innings from him every now and again. I'd say now there's more people in that England side that can give you that innings compared to when he first came into the side. So when he first came in, I'm trying to remember who was in that squad when he first got picked, but you've now got Jamie Smith, who I love Jamie Smith, and I think he's someone that can turn a game on its head with one innings. Harry Brook, we know what Harry Brook can give. Bethell, if Bethell's going to be involved, we're just adding. We've got so many people that we can throw into that batting lineup that can give you those magical innings. I feel like you can afford to not have Crawley now, and you can have someone who's going to be a bit more consistent. Who that is, I don't know, but there are definitely people out there that will give you a solid 30 or 40 every week, opposed to nicking off second ball.
Yeah, so we'll stay away from premonitions for Perth as much as we can.
Oh, he'll still hit the first ball for 4, but he might get out second ball.
Yeah, exactly. No one's saying first ball because we all know where that first ball's going. It's through the covers like a tracer bullet. But moving on to the sort of to the enemy, if you will, and not to make it sort of tribal in that way, but in the sense of moving on to Australia, is the big news. Obviously, has been the confirmation of the rumour, if you will, of Cummins being out for the first test. I think we talked about him a lot, despite talking about England, or maybe I did. With Scott Boland is going to be the very obvious replacement. I mean, if they went for someone else, I think it would be crazy fundamentally. Yeah, I managed to scare myself. I was telling you before we started recording, I managed to scare myself. England fans, maybe stop listening for a second, but his career best first class figures, I know, are not the 6 for 7 against us at Boxing Day, although it's 4 years ago. It's a 7 for 31 in Perth in 2015, so about 10 years ago, admittedly. So, who even cares about that? But, just what does that sort of suggest to you? Does it feel like it's quite an exciting thing that we don't have Cummins, but then is there kind of that, boogeyman aspect of Boland, I guess?
I think from a cricket point of view, it's a shame he's missing that first test, because I think even though he's an Aussie, Pat Cummins is one of my favourite players. I love watching him play, not always against England, but that game will be less of an occasion for the loss of Pat Cummins. I think from a cricketing point of view, it's a massive loss to Australia. Don't think it actually affects the captaincy, in my own opinion, because I don't think I think he's captain in name, and I think Smith's been running things on that field anyway. Is my honest opinion.
No, that's fair.
And actually, I think from what I've seen from Aussies, a lot of them don't really rate him as captain as much. They obviously rate him as a player, but they've said, sometimes his decisions on the field aren't great. So, but from a playing point of view, yeah, and he's got a great record against England. He's a world class player. Scott Boland coming in. I've seen a lot of England fans going, "Oh, he went at 5 and over last time. He's 36, 37 now." Yeah. How old's Jimmy Anderson? They'd be scared of Jimmy Anderson, and I'll hold my hands up as an Englishman. I am scared of Scott Boland. He's a great player, and he's a completely different beast in his own conditions. We can't use what happened in England with him before. I know there's more fitness questions around him this time, but yeah, it's certainly not so. It's not the win that a lot of England fans might think it is.
Yeah. I guess that's the interesting aspect is how much will the England players take from that? It is an interesting one. You talked about earlier very, very well the kind of cricket is such a psychological game. And all it took was just exercising those demons a bit, even if it was on a really flat deck where we smashed them around, is on a fast, bouncy pitch in Perth. Even will they just have less of a fear for the kind of unknown in a way? But I kind of tend to agree with you that you shouldn't take things from literally however many miles it is between the UK and Australia, because they are two totally different beasts.
And they will still go after him. They will absolutely go after it. There's going to be, regardless of what happened with Cummins or not, they were always going to go after one bowler because they have to. That's I don't think Bazball's as Bazball as it has been in previous years, but they're always going to target one bowler. Interesting to know who it would be actually if Boland wasn't in the side.
Stark, I guess.
Probably Stark, but I think they will go after Boland. I don't think they'll change that based on how he's bowling. If he's ripping through him, they won't change it, which is one of those things that as an English fan will frustrate you, because England don't seem to have that switch where they can go, this isn't working, let's stop this. They'll go, no, let's just keep walking into the field, that's the term they use a lot, which I part love and part hate. But the one area where the Aussies have suffered from and England have gained with this news is obviously the batting, because that is a significant tail now. Cummins is a good bat. We've seen Cummins win games for Australia with the bat many times in his career. So the tail's got longer. Another caveat to that is that we also have England now finally have a bowler who can actually sweep up the tail, it seems, in Josh Tongue. How much would he play? I don't know, but I like Josh Tongue, and it's like, he's the sort of person that can give you those wickets, when you're trying to mop up the tail. So that's definitely an area where England have won. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out.
No, I think you make a very good point in the sense of that longer tail. It's something that you kind of don't always consider. And I guess that's something, going back to England briefly, is that I think often, and again, knowing Jack Carson in a more personal way, that he can bat fairly well. I always think, well, Sher Bashir is he's a proper number 11. It's like if you don't have, and that's the Boland coming in, as you say, he is that proper kind of rabbit number 11. So again, with the Hoover, as they were calling him, whatever that was, and just seeing him do that, it would be interesting if Josh Tongue can deliver on that. I was going to ask you about your opinions on the Smith Cummins angle, but you kind of already alluded to it. I guess it's an interesting one. I think, Smith was. I think maybe people underestimated how much of an impact he has at the moment already before this, and I guess that's probably where your view comes into it.
There's a bit sinister to it. I think that's sort of any one of Steve Smith's cricketing brain being on a cricket pitch is going to be used in the same way that England, Ben Stokes is captain, but there's without a doubt input from Joe Root. There was input from Stuart Broad, Jimmy Anderson when they were playing, and Harry Brook is probably inputting as well. So I think Steve Smith, will always contribute to a team that he's playing in. But yeah, it kind of feels like, and I'm not the only person to say that. I've seen Aussie say that as well, that Smith's really the captain. So how true it is, I don't know, but it's I'm sure. Well, we'll find out.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's an interesting one, and yeah, you wonder in that sort of group dynamics aspect with him captaining the first test. It's like if it goes well, say the Aussies win the first test, which I think would be the betting odds. Then if England won the second test, was Cummins back in, and I mean Australia have always had this real unity, and I think there's never really divisions in the ranks. But yeah, I never really considered that until this very moment. Is that like would they suddenly have this sort of thought? Was like, well, it was going really well with this very calm and calculated Steve Smith, who is one of the most tactically aware and astute captains there is. But whereas Cummins has maybe the limitation of, because again, I think Cummins speaks quite openly like that when he's bowling, he very much succeeds to Steve Smith. But the issue is also if you're the best bowler for Australia, which he is that you tend to bowl quite a lot. So then you are succeeding the responsibility a lot more than you otherwise might do. It's an interesting one.
And it's why we don't see a lot of captains who are bowlers for that exact reason. So there was always going to be an element of someone else having to take up that mantra, and Steve Smith is obviously ever present in that side at the moment, and always will be till he retires now. So yeah, it makes sense that it's him. But yeah, it's interesting. I've seen people as well sort of saying that he shouldn't be allowed to captain, which I think is a whole separate debate. I feel like I'm a bit like he served his punishment now, and as much as it's something that England fans and myself included have used as ammunition against the Aussies because they still bite every time.
Yeah. Can't help themselves.
He served his punishment, and actually I don't think was actually one of the main instigators in that situation anyway. I think he was just captain. He was still involved, of course, but he wasn't the worst culprit. So I think he should be allowed to captain.
Yeah, I know. I struggle with it. I struggle with it very much. I come from a family of cricket lovers, and being maybe the most passionate amongst them, I was always kind of the most on Steve Smith's side. But then almost when this news was announced, I then realised I was becoming more hardline, being like, he should have been banned for life. He should never be able to captain again. So I'm sort of struggling with it internally because I kind of think it's an interesting one because if you oversee one of the biggest cheating scandals ever, should you be in a leadership situation again? Like and as you say, I totally agree with your assessment of it that he wasn't the big instigator. But then again, if you're the captain, when it's the kind of the leadership, where does the buck stop and all of that? I think I still do finish on the sympathetic point of view, which I guess is where you look at it. It's funny because even us talking about this, if I posted this as a clip, I'm sure would still get Australians riled up, even though we're basically both agreeing that Steve Smith has probably served his time. Do I think the ban should have been a bit longer? Maybe. Will I make a video at some point that Joe Root's longevity shouldn't be overlooked because the fact that he never got banned? Absolutely. So it's an interesting one, and without getting lost in what is a bit more like
it's a debate. It's a debate as old as time, and we will continue having this debate because it's just funny to watch the Aussies react to it.
I think that is exactly the point. Kind of moving on to, I guess, sort of staying on the same thing, but obviously the Aussies haven't released a squad yet in the way that most home teams don't tend to. They kind of do a bit more of a test by test, or maybe 2 tests by 2 tests. But what are the bowling lineup? I think, as we all agree, is pretty well set. It's like Boland in for Cummins, and when Cummins is back, Boland comes out unless injuries happen. Hazelwood has struggled with injuries recently, so there is a chance that, I guess to you, with the opener is being the big thing, and then Labuschagne struggling form in Test cricket. What to you, almost I guess from an England fan's perspective, what batting lineup scares you the most?
It's a good question. I can't claim to be as across Aussie cricket as I should be. So I've tried to keep on top of the shield, especially going into an Ashes series. But I wouldn't be probably the best place to sort of say it should be this guy. I think what I would say about Marnus Labuschagne, he's obviously hit form recently in Australia. A bit like I said about Scott Boland, I am scared of Marnus Labuschagne because he always does well against England. Yeah. I do think he's just that kind of, I know he's been poor recently in Test cricket, but he's one of those guys that is just built for big series. He can step up. He's sort of, in the same way England would never write off a Ben Stokes if he was going for a bad patch, or even a Harry Brook or Joe Root, because we know we have it in him. I'm not saying Marnus Labuschagne's the same level of ability as those guys, but they do have that innate ability to just pull it out of nowhere. So I think he will go, and I think he will probably score runs. The question is, does he bat three? Does he open? I think he'll probably end up opening, to be honest.
Right, okay.
I don't think that changes my point of view on how he'll go. I don't think he'd be consistently solid throughout, but I think he would score runs. And then so I guess it'll be Kawaja and Labuschagne opening. But then as to who's three, probably Cam Green. I think probably is the person it looks like. Who again, I don't fear Cam Green. He's a brilliant cricketer, but that isn't a top three. Which in previous years I've looked at the top three of Australia and gone, how are we getting those out? I'm pretty confident we could get those out. The challenge with Australia is you get 4 and 5 out. That's where the runs come from. It's Steve Smith, it's Travis Head. And this is why I don't buy into this Stuart Broad sort of mantra of it's the worst Aussie side since 2011 or whatever. Any Aussie side that has Steve Smith, Travis Head, Mitchell Starc, Josh Hazlewood, Nathan Lyon, and Pat Cummins if he's fit, that's not a bad side, and it can't ever be classed as worse of anything because that's still a side that can win a Test match easily.
Yeah, I guess the way that maybe Broad's response to that would be is that it's just an argument of how good Australian sides have been, more than it's an argument of like that they've been so good that just a slightest drop off in their aging means it is the worst, but it doesn't mean it's a bad one. I guess is a kind of another more of a relativity point in a way. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think I slightly disagree with you in a way because I think an interesting wrinkle is that. And I think it's, again, in England, you don't pick up on the things as much as I like to think I'm very across all domestic cricket, but you can't be if you have if you have a more holistic life, maybe. But is that Matthew Renshaw being picked for the ODI squad, I thought was a bit of a suggestion he might be their player. He scored 100 in the first. I say you might have a bit of a life if you know about Sheffield Shield cricket, and then I'm instantly saying he scored 100 in his first Sheffield Shield match, which I do know. I think he might be the interesting one. I know Kawaj has come out and said very openly that he thinks it should be him and Renshaw, then Labuschagne, which is an interesting one. So whether or not Labuschagne, who's him and Kawaj have always had quite a close relationship, whether or not he has openly said, I don't want to open, or he just really believes in Renshaw because he's played with him for years and years and years. I think when it comes down to who am I more scared of with the bat in hand between Cam Green and Matthew Renshaw, I think it is Matthew Renshaw. In the sense of he's had a bit of time in the Australian squad and done all right. He's averaged high 20s, which is of course nothing to be particularly oh, wow, that's amazing. But I think you always think with these cricketers is there's the runs that there's yet to be scored almost. It's who do you see? He's a 29-year-old, incredibly hungry, and he's had I'd say he's had about 2 or 3 seasons of being top of the rank runs and all of those kind of things. So, and the reason I bring up the ODI squad is that he is a better red ball player than he is a white ball player. So whether or not that's their kind of, not like a subtle hint, but just a subtle get him in the squad, get him around the lads in this squad and see how he goes and see how he fits in almost as we're talking about sort of team dynamics. But it's an interesting one because I think you're right. I think there is an equal chance that they go Labuschagne at the top, Cam Green, and obviously Webster at 6. Because I think Bo Webster is maybe not undroppable because I think there's a chance he does get dropped, but I think I would be very surprised if they didn't go with Bo Webster with how well he's taken to Test cricket, all the options he gives. I mean, a 6'5" fast medium bowler who also bowls very handy off spin. I mean, it's literally 3 players in one. It's quite an interesting. He is a very interesting cricketer, and he probably falls into one of my favourite Aussie cricketers if you can have one.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. He has to go and he has to play. And interest on Renshaw. I think what is nice is just that it's normally England that are having these dilemmas going into an Ashes series where we're thinking, who might this be? Where I feel again, we spoke about this right at the start, but there was no major surprises barred Will Jacks in that England squad. Yeah. The rest of it was kind of we knew he was going, where the Aussies, I think, are genuinely going to be waiting for that squad announcement, not knowing right up to the final moment who is batting in their top 3. And that, from an England point of view, it's not me saying that any of these guys in the top 3 won't do well or can't do well. They absolutely can do. But I would feel a bit uneasy having those questions around the team this close to the series, where it's quite nice for us to be able to just relax and go, our squad's out there, it's done, they've played together for a long time. There's a bit of sort of unity and togetherness about that squad. I'm not saying Aussies don't have that, but there is some, this sort of chopping and changing at this stage is only benefits England, I think.
No, I think you make a very good point. Is if you're going to be harsh on England selectors and Rob Key and Baz and Ben Stokes for keeping the same team, you have to also give them the credit that the fact that they kept the same team does do all the things for cohesion and all of the things. And again, we spoke about football earlier. Like there is something to keeping the same 11 each week in a football team, and the same in a more macro sense for a cricket like side over the course of 2 or 3 years to kind of go, no, we're backing these guys, and then even as simple as the first wicket falls and Ollie Pope is walking out to bat, and he knows how to chat, he knows what gets Crawley and Duckett going, or vice versa, and it's that kind of interesting, that it's not as thought about in cricket as much because of you're not passing the ball between them, or you're not in rugby you're not passing the ball, whatever it might be. It's very individualized, but that team aspect is quite easily lost, I think. And I think in elite cricket, it's something that the Australians obviously famously always did. They had some of the great first-class performers who didn't play for Australian test sides because they had a set test team, and even if players didn't do very well, they kind of stayed in. The Australian batting sort of battery, if you will, has dwindled, and I think that is something that obviously scares Aussies in a way, is that they have slowly kind of ebbed out a bit. But it's an interesting one to see. I guess, as you say, kind of see how it plays out and see, if, say, they pick a Renshaw and at Perth and Brisbane he gets barely any runs, will they go, okay, well, we'll move Green up to 3, whatever it might be, it's how reactive each squad may be. Whereas I think you're right in the sense of, I don't think England will do that, other than the Pope Bethell thing, because I think I'd argue they're literally gagging for any reason to put Bethell into the team. But
the whole conversation around this Aussie batting lineup will exist for the whole series, and that's the lovely thing, because the batsmen in that lineup will know that. And the second there's any doubt, like you say, first test, if it all goes wrong for Renshaw, whoever gets picked, the press in Australia and the fans in Australia will be saying, "Oh, we should have gone with this person."
Yeah.
Where England won't have that, because even if Crawley goes badly, no one's going to be going, "Oh, well, we should have gone with Sibley," because we were never going to go with Sibley, and we all knew that. Sibley was the wrong example, but
I think
any opener, we always knew, whether you agree with it or not, it was going to be Crawley. So England fans won't be going, "We shouldn't have picked him. We'll just back him."
Yeah, 100%. I think I personally think Sibley, even in the world where we know that Sibley would never get picked, I think saying the batter who scored the most runs in Division 1 being another good option is not an unfair shout. So I don't think you're wrong in saying that at all. But I think you're spot on. Is you've got to give the credit where the credit is due, in that sense of like, well, they do stick with the players even if they're not doing particularly well. So you've got to say, well, we won't have that discourse. Even the most ardent of Aussie supporting newspaper, the journalist who writes for them, deep down in their heart, even if they write something about who's going to be dropped, the only person they can really say that about is Ollie Pope. And that is quite a nice, as you say, it's quite a nice place to be. In the last however many Australian tours, almost 3 or 4 batsmen have been dropped sort of throughout the series. Sorry, like and famously Alistair Cook dropped Joe Root in the 5th test at Down Under, and whatever. It was that kind of there's quite a few players who had really bad stints and then were coming out, and then the person who came in for them didn't score runs, and then they were back in, and that we've all we're just working through our trauma here, but it's nice to know, as any England fan who's terrified of Down Under series, is that there is a bit more continuity, and the bowlers are going to rotate, but that's more of a workload thing, which you can predict for. You don't have to. It's not a shock or whatever, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an interesting one.
It's nice.
But yeah, sort of moving on slightly is on to what I think is an interesting aspect is the pitches. So that usually the first test in Australia tends to be Fortress Brisbane, Gabba, tends to be that. They've gone with Perth, but it's interesting that they have gone with the most archetypal Australian wickets to kick us off. It's Perth at the Optus, which they've kind of said they've built in the mould of the Wacker, i.e. fast, bouncy, lively, etc. Then straight onto Brisbane, which again is probably even equally as famous, if not more famous, for that exact thing. So I guess the question I'm going to pose to you is, I saw Alistair Cook talking about it, is do you think a 4-seamer lineup without Bashir is beyond the question in those first 2 tests, and having Joe Root as your only spin option?
I can see a world in which that happens. I don't think that will happen. I think they'll still go with spinner in the first test. I just, for a little bit for what we just said, that sort of consistency and that cohesion, it's a bowling lineup that has been used to having Bashir in that lineup, and I think so they still will go for it. But I think that's largely why Will Jacks has been picked, so that they can potentially, if they want to go,
True.
you know, a bit of extra spinning, an extra spin option, but not have a frontline spinner. Dax could potentially come in. That could also be where Bethell plays a part. But I hate this sort of like this idea that Bethel's a good enough bowler for Test cricket. He's really not. And I say that as a massive Jacob Bethell fan. Joe Root's a better bowler than Jacob Bethell. So we can't look at him as coming in as an all-rounder or a batting all-rounder. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think they'll certainly play. I don't know. I was going to say they'll certainly play one test without Bashir. They could play all five. I can really see a world in which they do that. So I think it's a hard one to answer that question, really. Yeah, no,
100%. It's sort of an unanswerable question in a way, because we are none of the people making that decision. But it's that kind of that aspect of if is kind of Bazball's way has almost always, as you say, run into the danger, almost always doubling down on decisions, always doubling down on like the game plan in a way. So it's an interesting one thinking, will they, even if the Australians go with a Nathan Lyon-less squad at one point, which again I think is very unlikely, but say they reckon a pitch is going to be so fast and so flat that they don't need a proper frontline spinner. Admittedly, they don't have the luxury of a Joe Root. I mean, Travis Head, but I would say Joe Root's probably a better standard bowler. Again, maybe that's just my England hat on. But I think it's an interesting one. But whereas if they weren't so strong on their convictions, would they think, actually, yeah, there's the first two test matches and we might be able to get away with just, and I think Alistair Cook put it as almost just like hit him hard early. Almost always the team who wins that first test wins the series. Not almost always is a massive hyperbolic statement, but you know what I mean? I don't know what the percentage is, but in a 5-test series, it is pretty high that if you win that first test, because of all the things you buzzwords of the momentum and the psychological aspects. I think it's interesting to know, as you mentioned earlier, that Bazball's almost become a little bit more smart. It's not as, just attack, no thoughts, just vibes kind of thing, versus being a little bit more calculated, which I think every England fan who really watches very carefully can obviously see that's happened, with certain chases and certain, don't get me wrong, there's still moments where infuriating moments, if to say it for lack of a better phrase, happen, but you can still see that there's a bit of a more of an educated aggression, if you were to use that phrase. So I guess it's an interesting one to see if they really think that those first two test matches are going to be flat, hard, and it will only spin on the last session on the fifth day. Is it worth exposing Bashir to that? To me, I would say no. But then again, that's probably because I don't rate Bashir that highly, whereas they really do.
Yeah, it is difficult. But I think even if I was just putting myself in the shoes of an Aussie, let's say a Matt Renshaw, right? Yeah. If he's picked and he's got to pick the lineup he wants to face, I think he would have Bashir in that lineup. If you offered him a lineup of, let's say, I'd love to see a lineup of Archer, Wood, Tongue, and Atkinson as a 4 with Stokes bowling. For me, that's a really solid bowling attack. Really? I wouldn't want to face that on a fast bouncy deck. But I don't think they will go for it. And it kind of comes into that walk into the fear aspect. Like their fear, I don't think England have fear, but if Rob Key or Brendan McCullum had a fear or a doubt, it probably, even though they're so resolute in how they back him, it probably would still be Bashir. And I don't think it's wrong to say that. I think their doubt would still be there as to how he'll go in Australia. But they'll pick him because I think all the talk around him, if you then didn't pick him for the first test, it almost proves all of the fans who have doubted him right. And then all of the Aussies, which will absolutely be putting the pressure on, where I think England are more likely to go, do you know what, we don't care what you think. We're backing him. We're going to pick him. He's going to take a fifer. Yeah. Maybe he will.
Yeah, maybe he will. And I hope that would be the case. Well, I guess moving on to the sort of the next three then kind of fit into the more similar mould of pitches, which are a bit more like classic test pitches in a way. Because you go to Adelaide, which is, I think, tends to be accepted as being the consistently best batting surface in Australia. Again, it's impossible to know. Surfaces are not as predictable as this, and as I was mentioning before we record, is that Australia is so massive that obviously you can't really predict whether or not you'll have certain heat waves or whatever it might be. But I think Adelaide is a bit more. I think Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney was where you'd 100% have a frontline spinner, just because of the kind of both the fact that the batting is a bit more like you're more likely to bat. More likely to be in a field for 130 to 150 overs versus in Perth and Brisbane, the game moving a lot quicker, I think is a lot more likely. I guess I'm not really posing this as a question, really. I guess it's more of just an interesting aspect of like, if they look at it more of like a calculated way of going, we'll attack him early with pace, see how it goes, and then we know we're going to have to use Bashir, and then almost you can say it's like, well, that was always the plan all along. Like we were never going to. But again, it's a bit of an interesting one. I think it's more of a, I guess in some ways, a bit more of a thought experiment than it is a, reality. Because I think you're probably right that the whole continuity point that we're making, I think they probably will stick with that.
I think what's going to be a challenge for England this year, so much more so than any other series down in Australia, is, let's say if we are at Adelaide and it is a batting deck and Aussie's going well, is who's going to bowl those overs if Bashir isn't going well. So if Bashir can't do, because he's not an economical can't say that word, economical bowler, he's not a Jack Leach who will just go at sort of 2 or 3 and over. Might not take the wickets, but he'll control an end. He can't do that because he's a wicket taker. That's how they see him. So then you would go, okay, well, in the past, we've had Chris Wokes who'll come on and bowl a big burst, or Matt Potts. It'd be interesting to see who plays that role from a seam point of view, because we have a lot of fragile seam bowlers, brilliant seam bowlers, but fragile seam bowlers. And we've got Jofra Archer, Ben Stokes, Mark Wood. All 3 of those could break down at any time. And for us to win this series, we have to keep all 3 of them fit for the whole series, in my opinion. You can maybe afford to lose Wood at some point if you've already got a game out of him, maybe, but you've got to keep them fit. So it's who comes in to do those long spell overs, and I guess you'd probably be looking at Bryden Carse for that, Gus Atkinson potentially, but then he's got a lot of injury issues as well. Is that where Matt Potts comes in to play a role? I don't know. So I think that's an interesting question going into it, is how England manage that workload of their bowlers, because I think a lot of people are just expecting it's going to be a low scoring series, because traditionally in recent years Australia has favoured bowlers, but you never know.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the interesting thing, is that you want to protect the pace bowlers who are going to win your series, but then again, if you're 2-0 down by the first 2 tests, then what are you protecting them for? It's a funny kind of, it's almost a bit of a philosophical debate in a way. It's like, do you keep your ace in the chamber, or do you go harder? It's a story as old as time, as the phrase used earlier. It's an interesting one, and I think it's a real tricky dilemma where, that's why they get paid the big bucks, I guess, is what the phrase you could think is that's why they're doing all the things they have. Yeah, because as you say, I was thinking, as you were saying, who's that bowler? Who's that bowler? I was almost like, oh God, who is that bowler? And then I was thinking Gus Atkinson, but then you're right, he has had quite a lot of injury troubles. Whereas again, a Matthew Potts is a bit more of a bit of a workhorse in a way. I guess, and I'm not getting lost in our spinner debate, but I guess that was always why I was interested in a Liam Dawson, in a Jack Leach, is because of the fact that I don't really care if they don't take many wickets. Like, everyone remembers that 2010-11 side, and Graham Swan is the obvious spinner, and he was brilliant. I was just out of interest the other day looking at the stats, as one does, and looking at the averages. But he bowled, I think, the most overs out of any of the bowlers, because he played in every test. But he took not that many wickets over the course of the season, accumulated wickets, but he never had a big series. He averaged something like 40 with the ball, but his economy was something like 2.75, which again, and I guess that's why you want the dream scenario of Bashir being a bit more like a Graham Swan, because of course Graham Swan was like 6'2", well not was, is 6'2", and had the top spin and all of those aspects, but had the control. I guess the issue is we don't have either. So it's again, how you play that, how you try and basically manage around the fact that the last time we went there, when it all went as perfectly as a series could go for England and Australia, we had a spinner who was very accurate and consistent and could just get through overs, whilst the bowlers, got hydrated or had a rub down or whatever it might be. You get 10 overs in a row. I think you're totally right. I don't think you can do that with Bashir unless it is a situation where he can be taking a lot of wickets. But I guess that's where it just comes down to, what do you view your spinner as? And I think in this team with Bashir, they view him as a wicket taker, as you say, and the bowlers, the pace bowlers are the ones to get through those overs economically to kind of put the pressure on. But yeah, who knows?
Yeah, who knows indeed. I mean, I still would have gone for Dawson. That was still my pick. I feel like he's a little bit unfairly been written off by England fans based on how he did in the India series, which, the reason I would have gone Dawson over Leach, for example, I think there's an element of Leach's numbers are incredible, but we also can't forget that he plays at Taunton, which does play a massive role. I think if you put Liam Dawson in Taunton, his figures will be equally impressive.
Totally
Shoaib Bashir, if he got picked for his own county, might actually get some wickets at Taunton. So, the reason why I want to go Dawson is I think you need someone that brings a bit of batting in Australia, which for me, he was the obvious choice that can do that. I think he's a really good batsman. I think he's actually a really underrated batsman as well, who could actually bring a lot to that side.
It's like 10,000 first-class runs.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Like, it's pretty...
and brings a huge amount of control, and probably as much as Leach.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my... I'm quite confident as a squad for England. I like how it looks. I like the balance of it all. The thing that worries me is if we do get a day where we're going to have to bowl a lot of overs, which I don't think will be often. Not saying England's going to walk it. I think both sides won't bowl long days. I think it will be low scoring.
Yeah.
But that's what worries me is those long overs.
No, 100%. It was I was literally chewing anyone's ear off at my cricket club, or mates who are into cricket or not even into cricket, about why Liam Dawson should be getting selected down under. Funnily enough, of course, it was never going to happen. As soon as Shoaib Bashir recovered from that finger injury, he was going to come straight back in. But it is that interesting aspect of to me, it's like he just seemed like an obvious fit, and it seemed like, again, when you're talking about the psychological aspects of cricket, you don't get much cooler than Liam Dawson. And it's interesting that they've really brought him into a lot of other, he's been playing in a lot more white ball cricket. In any sense, he's a really, really great all-round cricketer. But to me, it seemed like if he was going to come into the side, I think he's 34, maybe 35, if he was going to come into any of the sides at that age, it was going to be the Test team. And again, he didn't do very well in that was it Old Trafford. He played that one Test, but literally, I mean, you couldn't, you couldn't spin anything on that. I don't even think Shane Warne would get much turn on the wicket he was bowling on. So it's an interesting aspect of throwing people to the wolves, in the same way that I think Sam Cook got a really hard go of it. He got one Test opening the bowling again, admittedly hard go of it against Zimbabwe, but it was on an incredibly flat deck where someone who is a medium pace bowler or medium fast bowler is going to get made to look a bit of an idiot, which not saying he got made to look an idiot, but he didn't look great, let's say that. So yeah, I guess it's an interesting one, and this is where we come down to us as two England fans, and it's just almost our worries and our fears more than anything. But I think as an analytical point of view, I think there really is a fair shout of having bowlers who really can control an end a bit more. But anyway, moving on to a sort of broader thing that I guess is almost what we've been alluding to the whole thing, is that I think arguably you could kind of look it down and say there is one phase of the game which is more important than the other, is that if England's batting can sort of consistently do better than you'd expect against the bowling lineup, and again on the pitches that you're mentioning, that would be a huge thing. Whereas if, again, Australia prove the continuity is the case, in the sense of another England team that come with some confidence to Australia and then probably can average sort of first inning scores of about 150 to 200, that's where I think, to me, it could be as simple as that. But then I also think that's probably way too simple of looking at it. I guess I'm just interested in your thoughts on that sort of aspect, because I think we all agree that Australia's weaker side of their game is their batting, and our weaker side of our game is probably our bowling. Therefore, obviously, vice versa. It's an interesting one. I guess both are equally as important, but I guess it's just an interesting one to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think you're not far wrong with that, and I've definitely used the term of if it's our batsmen versus their bowlers, which is very much cricket, but that is a simple way of looking at it, because I do think we have a very strong batting lineup, they have a very strong bowling lineup. I don't think we have a weak bowling attack, but we have a bowling attack which is very much reliant on two people in Mark Wood and Jofra Archer. They have a batting lineup which I would say is very reliant on two batsmen. Yeah. Steve Smith and Travis Head. The only thing I'd say maybe in our favour is I think there's enough to excite you about those other bowlers. I think Gus Atkinson is a great Test cricketer. I think he can do damage in Australia. Josh Tongue is a really weird one. Josh Tongue grew up not far away from me, so I know a lot of people, and we actually played for the same club, not in the same year. So I've got sort of personal
between the two at Nottingham.
Yeah. So it's a personal connection to him, but I like him because he has this unbelievable ability to just bowl a Jaffa out of absolute nowhere. And you need people like that in these sort of series, because if you've got people like Steve Smith on the other team, sometimes you need someone who could bowl a magic ball to get him out, and Josh Tongue can do that, but he'll also bowl you a lot of full balls as well. So he's an interesting one. And then Cars, Potts, again, have got ability. Can they do it consistently against Australia? I don't know. So there's a lot of unknowns on both sides of it, but I think my only concern when you compare the two sides together is they are a lot more experienced than us, especially that bowling attack. And I do, even though our batting lineup is brilliant, you do just worry a little bit about the age of some of the guys. It's a big series for people like Jamie Smith. Like I saw cracks in Jamie Smith in that India series. Okay, that chase.
Yeah.
It was difficult, high pressure. Australia's going to be harder than that. And I just worry if is he going to be out in the middle and he's going to sort of be sort of like a deer in the headlights again.
Yeah.
Harry Brook, I have no concerns about. But there are still little things like that which you just sort of put a bit of doubt in your mind. But I think it can be as simple as we're very strong batting, they're very strong bowling. Let's go have it.
Yeah, like who wins those phases of the game will have a pretty, if you went in the sort of cricket analytic point of view, I think if they looked at it as like who wins the sessions when we're batting and they're bowling, I think if you look throughout, I mean, again, as you say, it's a bit of a yadoi, that's how cricket works. But in the kind of broader sense, it is a bit more like that is a bit more important. And maybe if you keep winning those sessions, and again, it's as simple as we get stuck in on the first day at Perth and, just one player gets a score, would that be enough to kind of have that dent and go like, well, we can do it, and they kind of have that,
quite possibly.
Whereas vice versa, if we get put in, and as I saw one of your memes, like waking up to see the score and it's like 100 for 7 or whatever it might be, it's 100% dead on, because I think so, a lot of England fans can have that ingrained in their mind of like, waking up to see a scorecard from down under and you go, oh, that again, cool, won't watch the highlights this morning.
And I think it's about winning the right sessions, not the most sessions, because England are England, and we will have, and that's why I've done many memes like that, and they all do well on social media because everyone's like, yep, we do that every year, because we do. England will always have the self-destruct session. We always do it. We can get back to being one of the best test teams in the world, and we'll still have those moments. It's like ingrained in the culture in the same way as, we play moral victories and all of that nonsense. That's also ingrained within us, is just that we have this self-destruct moment. But I think what England did well in the India series and very nearly won it because of that is that across that series, India won more sessions, I think, but England won the big sessions. They won those sort of game-changing moments, and that's what they've got to do in Australia. It doesn't matter if we have our 100 for 9 moment. We have to go and then do the 350 for 2 moment. And England have done that quite a lot recently, and that's what does give you sort of that positivity going into it. So it's all about winning the right sessions.
No, I think you're spot on. I think it's also an interesting one. I think as an England cricket fan, the Test series against India couldn't have been a better preparation. It got heated at points. It was super close throughout, and the standard of cricket was very, very high. Of course, the conditions will be different. Of course, the atmosphere, intensity will all be different. But it's quite nice for, again, as you say, some of those young players, and even if they were in failures, as you say with Jamie Smith, and largely even you could say Harry Brook, getting himself out when he did, and all of the things, but they've had those moments. A lot of sports people talk about, Ben Stokes famously, he got hit for 4 straight sixes and lost the T20 World Cup because of it, and what came out of it after that, some of the greatest innings cricket has seen. So it's an interesting one where you can kind of convince yourself as an England fan, well, that it was a really perfectly, but then nothing can prepare you for an Ashes. You hear all the ex-pros talk about it. Nothing can quite get you in that frame of mind. I also find, just speaking of the moral victory on it, because we'll move on to our sort of, my last point is how riled up Aussies are before this series, and I think to be fair, probably equally England fans maybe are as well, because it's just that excitement and this there's just such an anticipation for this series for all the reasons since 2023. But what I find so funny about where the moral victory stuff came from is that Harry Brook got asked and answered in a very Yorkshire way, in the sense that he got asked, do you find the test match where the Aussies got it rained off and we just drew, and it would have taken the last test match to a decider, but we won it to draw the series? And he got asked by, I don't know if it was an Aussie journalist or a British journalist or someone from further afield, but he got asked, do you take that as a moral victory? As in, like, do you think you would have won that test match had there not been rain? And he just really straightforwardly went like, yeah, I guess so. And then that has born this like almost stick to beat England with, but then also something we've almost taken like slight pride in. We're like, yeah, well, we do play cool, fun and cricket, and people do love watching baseball and and what the funny thing is, and kind of getting onto what is, I saw a like suggested reel for myself on Instagram the other day, and it was of a rugby league, an Australian rugby league page, and I was like, how has this come onto my feed? Like, I've never watched a game of rugby league in my life. And it was this guy being like, I'm so excited for the England-Australia Rugby League series because I hate the England cricket team so much. And he was this Aussie guy. And I was like, could nothing sum up like how much anticipation there is for this series is that I think it's safe to say there's not always a massive overlap maybe between rugby league fandom and cricket fandom. But there's this Australian rugby league commentator, and it had blown up. I mean, it had loads and loads of shares and likes and all the things. And it was because he was just like, I'm partly English. My dad grew up in England. I usually don't mind England. I usually kind of support them in a lot of things. But I hate them so much. This English cricket team has made me hate everything to do with England. And I guess as you're kind of more on the pulse of it, because you make the content and I see your interactions with people in the comment section, which are always very enjoyable, do you think it's as simple as, the Carey stuff from the last series, the general hatred there is always? I guess it's all a bit of a melding pot in a way.
I think most of it is good natured, and like yes, I feel like a lot of the things, the comments I've seen on some of my stuff is actually Aussies laughing or agreeing. So Aussies are great, and I certainly never make anything intentionally to rile people.
Yeah,
it's the same both ways, and I think it's the moral victory thing is like, I think that's the only thing they've got at the moment is the moral victory. Yeah. The moral victory in the fact we haven't won there for so many years. Yeah. Fine. Like, we all know that. Actually, if anyone's going to criticise the England team or take the mick out of the England team for that, it's England fans, right?
It does tend to be us.
But the moral victory thing, everyone I speak to about that, we all have the conversation. Where did that come from? And we don't know where it comes from, so it can't be that big a thing over here, right? So, but I think let them do that. If the only thing they've got to throw at us is that we're not very good and that we had a moral victory win, well, we can literally go, or they literally brought the game into disrepute with one of the worst cheating scandals in history of cricket. I'll take that moral victory.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
It's the best part of cricket, and like if cricket didn't have the build up like this, it wouldn't make the Ashes the wonderful series it is. And either way, I was going to say one of us will have to eat humble pie at the end of it. We won't, because both of us will at some point throughout the series. There's going to be days England are on top, and you can bet anything you want that the England fan will be nice and loud on social media when that's happening. Likewise, Australia will as well. And I'm sure if we all were in person, and I know you're lucky enough to be over there, I'm sure you'll be having many beers with many Aussies, and it's so it's all good fun. But I just love it, and I just think like it's just going to ramp up even more over the next few weeks. And I've certainly got a lot of content, which hopefully is going to rile some more of them up. So
I'm sure it will. I think what is going to be interesting. I think there's been some numbers coming out about like the Barmy Army support is that it is one of the biggest like cohorts going out and all of that stuff. Wow. So I think it will be an interesting one. I think both teams have got that that kind of catching lightning in a bottle in a way, and I think Bazball has as much as you like it, loathe it, whatever, it has really caught like the imagination of cricket fans, and they are like, England are right behind this team and are really into it. And I think there's the kind of charismatic leader theory as well. You've got Ben Stokes, one of our greatest cricketers ever, going over there, and he's made it very, very, very clear that this is the thing that he finds most important, as has Joe Root, probably at this point England's greatest ever batter, definitely, but arguably greatest ever cricketer. So I guess it's the same as Rory McIlroy talking about the golf in the US and being like how big another Ryder Cup win in America was to him, is that it kind of if when the stars of the game make it such an obvious point that this is our Everest, this is our biggest deal, that fans get behind it. But then in the Ashes, it doesn't take much for fans of each country, whether or not they are massive cricket fans either, to get right into it. That's what makes it so wonderful.
I think one of my biggest sort of hopes for this series, aside from the results, is that we get quite a feisty series. I feel like we haven't had that as much as Ashes go. I know we had the whole sort of Carey run out kind of stuff, but that was more sort of after the game. In the same way, like one of the reasons why the India series was so good is there was a bit of bite to it. There was, I loved the whole sort of like Shubman Dr. Crawley. I love it. Like that's cricket. It's great. It makes it. You'll all shake hands at the end of the game, or maybe you won't. Who cares? It doesn't matter, right? But to watch it's brilliant. And I think that's one thing which you could say more so about the England side. They're a little bit nastier now. I feel like we've been quite placid for a few years. I'm not saying we're full of bad blokes. Aussies will probably say we are. But like, there are guys in there that will give a little bit to the Aussies, and the Aussies would always give a bit back as well. So I just hope we get a nice sort of feisty series. We have some good sort of stump mic moments. Because that all just adds to it. So I just can't wait. I think the interesting thing, just one final point on sort of how England fans and Australia fans are approaching the series, and actually not just England fans and Australia fans, England players and Australian players. All Australians are talking about is us.
Yeah.
Free press, they're asked about, what do you think about Bazball? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? Are they going to get the moral victory? Where I know we're talking about Australia now, so I see the irony in that. But most of what we're talking about is actually our own team. We're going, should we have picked Bashir? Why we pick Crawley? We should be doing this, should be doing that. Yeah, Jamie Smith, he's going, well, Harry Brook, he's brilliant. No one's really going, what about Steve Smith? What about this? Because we know Steve Smith's good. We know he'll score runs. Yeah, we're not scared of him. If he goes to score runs, then great. But it just feels like the whole Aussie narrative over there is about what we're going to do, not what they're going to do. And I think maybe, is there something in that?
No, I like it.
Not for me to say.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Also, with the kind of the cheek aspect, is that I think there has been even a bit of a death of like stump mic moments, because since the stump mic's been such a big thing in a way, like, you know, pro cricketers aren't totally, you know, they're not totally stupid. They're very aware that if you're out in the middle, the things you say are going to get caught. But having said that, you know, the Tim Payne and Rishabh Pant moments like come to mind, and there are some brilliant moments where it doesn't have to be offside, it doesn't have to be abusive. But that is what cricketers love about cricket is, you know, if you play club cricket on a Saturday, the bits of chat out in the middle, the things that can rile people up just on a 1-day game, let alone a 5-day game where Crawley was doing the most hilarious, like, over the top wasting of time and all of that kind of stuff, having the Indians have done the same thing and all of those bits. And I think it's easily forgotten as a fan. It's like, yeah, these blokes are literally sharing the field for 5 straight days, 5 different times in the course of about a month and a half. It's like, especially when you're the men representing 2 rival nations. It's, there's nothing more to bring out a bit of spice and a bit of interest. So I mean, I am, as you probably has been obvious throughout this, is our excitement is very much palpable. I guess we have to wrap it up. I mean, again, as we mentioned throughout this episode, we could chat for hours and hours and hours, because that is just the beauty of cricket. But yeah, again, Liam, thank you so much for coming on. If you haven't heard of Liam or anything, like Liam Before Wicket, you can find him on Instagram, I'm sure TikTok and all of these social media,
YouTube, all of them.
Yeah. So thank you again so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. And up the Ashes, up England, and I hope we can chat afterwards and talk about how well we did in a review episode, maybe.
Absolutely, fingers crossed. And Shoaib Bashir is the leading wicket taker.
Yeah, God, I really hope so. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, guys. If you're still here and at this point, subscribe, like, comment, all of that stuff. If you're an Aussie, tell us what you hate so much about us. Anyway, thanks very much for listening, guys. Cheers.